Welcome to the Reba Jam YouTube channel where we do a lot of crochet and DIY things. Today I'm showing you how to make a market bag with this Dishie yarn cotton from crochet.com. We're going to start by doing a magic circle. So wrap it around your hand like this. Take your hook, go under, pull through there. Pull that little bit through there. Perfect. And that is your starting chain. So for this bag, we're going to be working mostly in half double crochets. So the first thing you're going to do is chain up 2. And then we're going to do 10 half double crochets around your magic ring. Pull that string nice and tight so your circle's nice and small. And yeah, we're going to do 10 half double crochets all the way around to start that first round.
Really excited about it, and then it doesn't match that vision. It can be really easy to despair a little bit about it, and I think some of the things we're going to talk about today would really help to temper that, though. Yeah, but it's hard. I think something that all of us struggle with. Don't you think? I agree. I think that my immediate reaction is to give up. Yeah. I don't think I've always been this way, but again, with my really limited time, and some things, I feel like it's gone into bad territory, and I don't think I'm going to be able to fix it with like relative ease. I put it in the bin, and I just let it languish there for like a year, and I'll come back to it in my little like project graveyard and decide which things I want to salvage. And interestingly enough, like 50% of the time, I end up making whatever change I need to make, and it wasn't as big a deal as I thought it was going to be, and then I'm like happy into it, and I have something new to wear, and it's great. But in the moment, sometimes like, my first instinct is just to abandon shit. Sometimes you have to abandon shit. Sometimes you do have to, and maybe do it a little too freely these days. Sometimes that is the best thing for you, you know? Something is just not working. I can sometimes the opposite direction, just plug away at something and like try and force it and make it work instead of moving on to something that's going to make me happier. Yeah, I will say that getting a little like time and space away from it does give me better perspective. So when I do come back to it, lots of times I'll have different ideas on how to fix it. My mistakes don't feel as personal anymore. Like that was like 6 months ago, Haley. Like she doesn't know what she's doing. I do. Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes that's all you need, just a little time to pass and the emotions to dissipate a little bit. Yeah, totally. All right, well, I'm going to get into the tips for today, and I'm going to kick us off with our first tip, which is identifying the kinds of thoughts that are getting in your way. I think we've just started kind of chipping away at that. But yeah, the first step to overcoming anything, especially self-doubt, is to just notice it. One great way to do this is to find the patterns and the kinds of thoughts that you have frequently that stop you from creating or from learning. So here are some examples of that I know that we've all experienced at some point. You could be telling yourself, I'm not ready yet. This idea isn't that good. I'm overwhelmed by the size of the project. Ding, 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 ding. I know it won't be perfect. I don't know what to do next. I don't have the time or energy right now. I think these are some like really common thought patterns that all of us have fallen into at some point in time. I know that a couple of these feel really true to me right now. And sometimes these things might be true, and so oftentimes they also might not be true. It's just about noticing the kinds of thoughts you're having around your creative work and just the noticing of them. You'll start to see patterns, which will make it a lot easier for you to pick out these kinds of thoughts in the future, or to pick up when you're having them. Yeah, and all of those are really familiar to me. I definitely feel all of those from time to time. I think specific projects for each of those thoughts too. So the next step, after you've kind of noticed what the thought actually is that you're having that's inhibiting you, is to try reframing. So this is a technique that I learned from a book by Martha Beck, and it's based on work by the writer Byron Katie, but I really like the way Martha Beck kind of explains it in these steps. So once you notice the kinds of thoughts that are getting in your way, you ask yourself 3 questions. And the first question is it true? So that question is about, is whatever story you're telling yourself right now true? And it might be true. So for example, let's take the thought that Haley mentioned, I know it will be perfect. So whatever you're making probably won't be perfect. So maybe that is true. Maybe it's not perfect. The other thoughts you might be having might not be true. So it really depends, but that's the first question, to ask yourself if it's true. And then the second question is it working? So in other words, is this thought helpful to you? So in the case of I know it won't be perfect, you might say no, that thought's not really helping me right now. It might be true, it won't be perfect, but it's not helping me to make progress on this project right now. And then the third question is, what's a more helpful story I can tell myself about this? So this should be something that you actually believe. So this isn't just about positive thinking and going from I know it will be perfect to I know that I'm gonna make the absolute perfect project and no problems whatsoever. Yeah, so that's not necessarily something that you would believe. So instead you might say something like, I know this will come out perfectly the first time, but I gotta learn at least one thing if I try it anyway. That might be a perfectly reasonable way to think about it. That still acknowledges that this is not gonna be perfect. And it might motivate you to keep going in spite of it not being perfect. So I really find those 3 questions really, really helpful. I actually use these as journaling questions every day, and it helps me to kind of think about what are some other ways that I can rethink an issue I'm having or something that's bothering me right now, or something that's causing me some anxiety or some worry. And I find it really, really helpful. Another really helpful tool is to keep a list of proud moments. I think humans have this natural bias towards negativity. Just being able to notice mistakes, problems, possible danger. It's an inborn survival instinct that we all have. So you kind of have to work hard at noticing the good things. One way to do this is to keep a list of your prouds. Whenever you do something that you're proud of, add to your list. You can review this list at any time. You start to feel down, but you're sewing. It might even push you to try more challenging things so that you can add them to your list. I think it's helpful to keep this somewhere where you can see it, maybe up on a magnet on your fridge, a post-it on your sewing machine. Just as that like motivation to see all of the things that you've overcome in the past, and a reminder that you probably will do the same with your upcoming projects and obstacles you may bump into as you sew. Yeah, and I like that idea. I also like thinking about, what are some things to add that might not be necessarily like you might think immediately like, oh, I made this dress, I'm really proud of that. That might be a great one to add. But it can also be things that you've learned or you can try. You didn't succeed at it, do your best. Yeah, that's something to be proud of too. Yeah, I sewed buttonholes for the first time. Yeah, they don't have to be perfect to make a list. It's just the fact that you did them. Yeah, absolutely. The next tip is one I really like. It's to turn it into a game. So this is an idea that I learned from a book called Impro by Keith Johnstone. He's a famous teacher of improvisation in theater. And so a lot of times when people are learning to improvise in theater, they're so afraid of making mistakes that they just flat out refuse to use their imagination. And he's saying this all the time in his classes. So to get around this, he uses games. And for some reason, when something's turned into a game and you tell people it's a game, our fear goes way down and we feel less inhibited. I think this is so fascinating. It's an interesting like psychological phenomenon. So it made me think, how can you turn sewing into a game if you're feeling that fear and that self-doubt? And so here's a few ideas that came to my mind, and you can probably add your own. So one is you could invent some fun like merit badges for yourself every time that you try something new. I think that would be really cool. You could make a list of low cost or no cost prizes to award yourself for tiny wins. Like, I don't know, you could make yourself a really nice tea latte, know, for one of your wins, or you could light a candle, start the window for 5 minutes, whatever it is that is like a little treat for yourself. Every time you achieve one of your wins, you could give yourself points for every new thing you learn. I think that would be a really cool idea too. I think the trick here is just to make your game about the effort you put in and not about the outcome. But I think if you make it about the outcome, about succeeding at creating something perfectly, or executing something just the way you intended, then it can become almost a negative thing. It can become like you're giving yourself points only every time you succeed, and start feeling bad about not succeeding. Versus if you give yourself points for effort, I think that can be a really positive thing, because even if you don't succeed, you have learned something and you have something to take away from it. So I think it's about rewarding yourself for the things that are actually going to make you feel good. I have an important question. What is your favorite low or no cost prize? Actually, I have a list. My treats list, my treats menu, and I separate it into like really tiny things, and then I have like bigger things on it as well. But one of my favorite treats is taking a bath. Me too. That's my go-to. I treat myself to a bath almost every day because I love it so much. Deserve it. I love a bath. That's my go-to like treat thing as well. Or just like little self-care things like that, painting my nails. Yeah. I love like little girly things. Yeah. A little just on a face mask and lay down or read a book. Just little things like that. Yeah, I love like a marinate and rot kind of a moment. Absolutely. All right. So our next tip is to remember that failure is essential. Not only is occasional failure, it's totally normal. It's also unavoidable. It's actually really an essential thing. In Art and Tip Women, they write, this is in quotes, one of the basic and difficult lessons every artist must learn is that even the failed pieces are essential. That's because they say, this is not that anymore, that's because they say that the job of the artist is to learn how to create. So an artist might not have a few pieces that they consider real successes, but they could have gotten there without all the pieces that didn't quite work out, and all the lessons that you've learned along the way from those quote unquote failures. And this is the same with any craft, really, not just fine art. If you think your job is learning to do something you love rather than making something perfect every single time, it's a whole different way of thinking about the process. I actually had a really interesting conversation with someone recently, and we were talking about tolerance to failure. And I made a joke, which was not really a joke, that I'm a professional failure. And they're like, no, that's not true. You're not. They thought I was like putting myself down. I was like, no, that's actually what being a designer is being a professional failure. Do you know how many like ideas that I like have to work through and sift through before I land on one that I like? It's spoiler, it's a lot. It's a lot of ideas. It doesn't make me feel bad about myself. I don't feel bad about myself because I have to sketch 50 different boxes before I settle on the design I like. It's just part of the job. It's just part of the process. I think that's why a lot of times, if you've ever attended like a trends workshop or any like community events that I host, I often invite home sewers to think of themselves like a designer. I think it like creates a degree of separation that helps you to take things a little bit less personally. That's just all part of the process, and you're just doing your job. Failing is just me doing my job. Yeah. And so failure doesn't freak me out very much because I have this like exposure therapy to it. Yeah. I mean, I think the same in my role, just in running a small business. I think there's so much failure and there's so much change that happens that you have to become very comfortable with. And it's a great lesson for life too, because life has changed. It's just we have this idea, I think, in our minds that we're gonna work hard and everything's gonna be perfect someday. And that's never gonna happen really. Everything's gonna be shifting forever. And I think the more you can get comfortable with that, the less stress you feel. And that's a lesson that I think most of us have to learn over and over again. Yeah, totally. All right, well, I'm gonna recap our tips before we share our big takeaways from this episode. So this is kind of a neat one. There's some really big ideas in here, and hopefully you found something that's gonna help you. So our first is, this is kind of the first step, is identifying the kinds of thoughts that are getting in your way and just noticing them and noticing what patterns, what thoughts come up over and over again for you. The second step is to try reframing. So I mentioned 3 questions you can ask yourself that came from Martha Beck. 1, is it true? 2, is it working? And 3, what's a more helpful story I can tell myself about this? Number 3, the third tip, is to keep a list of your prouds. Number 4 is to turn it into a game. So turn your sewing into a game where you reward yourself for effort. And then finally, remember that failure is essential to creating something, and that if you want to create anything, you're going to have to accept some amount of failure in order to get there eventually. And that to think of yourself as your job is to learn how to do this. It's not to do it automatically perfectly every time. So I think these are super helpful for me. Hopefully they're helpful for you guys too. So what's your big takeaway from this episode, Haley? I think I've got some really big meaty problems I'm working on right now. And at the end of the day, I feel really tired. And I was thinking that I really need that challenge, and I need things that are difficult in my life. And if I didn't have it, for example, we just came back from a 2-week break where I wasn't working on really anything difficult, I really kind of missed that. And so what came to me last night was that what I really need in my life is external challenge but internal ease. And I really like having a lot of difficult things to work on, and obviously the world is difficult, and there's things that are just being presented to you that you have no control over that are difficult. And what I'm really craving is just that sense that I can deal with everything no matter how difficult it is, and that's the thing that I really want to work on. So this really brought that up for me, because just this idea of how you talk to yourself about problems and how you deal with them internally and face them and keep going and maintain that sense of internal ease even when the external things are hard is such a key skill in life. And like you're saying, that's something that sewing can teach you, just like any kind of creative act can teach you. So I think that's really special. All right, well, before we wrap up today, I wanted to give a little shout out for our free sewing planner. Haley talked about becoming kind of a designer of your own wardrobe, and our free sewing planner is a really great tool for that. It's a printable tool that can help you design and plan your sewing projects, and it includes pages for sketching looks, for planning out individual projects with sketches and swatches, and you can print as many pages of it as you need, so it's pretty cool. And it's available for free at seamwork.com/go/planner, so that's seamwork.com/go/planner, and give us your email and we'll email it to you right away. And if you like this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. We'd love to hear what you think. So if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, you can leave us 5 stars right now. And if you want to leave a review at the same time, you can. We'd love hearing from you guys. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and become part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of classes, our podcast listeners get a 50% off lifetime discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. So that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50. And that's it for us this week. I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley. vocal groove as it for the general public, and transcending capture good, that it didn't matter. That is, every night. That show, by the way, looks
and didn't know if I was going to make
So
it.
after we do 10 rounds with the increases, so at that point we'll have 9 stitches in between our increased stitches.
I mean, I think that's really the greatest thing
we're
about
gonna do 2
art,
rounds.
right? Is that it creates bridges,
just
and
half
it causes worlds to collide. So I ran into this friend outside my studio this morning, and we talked about just very briefly that idea of art opening pathways and fostering conversation, and that's really the kind of art that we're drawn to use. And that's always been the case for me, and my work really did function that way when I was first able to get back to it. And I did have this goal in my studio. We do this all of Austin does East Austin Studio Tour, and Austin Studio Tour in general, where different parts of the city, all these artists open up, and they're community events, exhibitions, and so I really had a goal, like, okay, once I got that spark back, I was like, I'm gonna open my studio, and I want to do that. I was in the hospital until 3 days before East, and so that's when I first was like fiddling with these collages, and I was stuck in my room, but I had the wherewithal to be able to lay in bed and work with my hands or sit in the window or whatever.
Single
So I got out, and then my mom helped me
that.
put these shelves together and kind of rearrange my studio, and I was able to open up for that first weekend and talk to people, and it was amazing. It was kind of this like flashback of the life that I had before I got sick, and how much I love sharing work with people and talking to people about art, and people who were coming out to see the arts in Austin and really wanting in this event to engage with people. And then immediately after that weekend, I was back in the hospital. I had to skip the second weekend, but it was like that seed, right? I was like, oh yeah, this is really who I want to be. And now that I let that go, that's what I'm really fighting for, to be that person again. And yeah, I'm really excited to be, as I said, working on this new figure in my series, continuing my series, but this figure is the healer, which it was my idea to do a healer and a fool to wrap up the series of large woodcuts. But I don't think I could have done it the right way. I don't think I could have made these pieces the right way without going through this crazy illness and crazy time of survival and almost losing everything back. And I'm not saying like there's no way I can put all of that into these pieces, but it's kind of like a profound art therapy for me, coming back to this and physically carving these ideas into this woodcut. I think it's going to be much more profound to me than it is to anybody else given the circumstances. But it feels good.
Well, that's right. I do believe that you never know what comes through in a work. You never know what you imbue into what you make that is there just below the surface that are non-cognitive forms of communication pick up on. I do believe in that idea of like the aura of art and our intentions project onto things, and as woo as that might sound.
That's the magic of it. I totally believe that. I know that there's something that we can't put our fingers on, right? And or describe accurately, and the subjectivity of art or just the emotion. Like I think we've all stood in front of a piece of artwork and just left.
Yes.
Or heard something that just like destroys us in the most beautiful, profound way. And those are things that are deeply personal, right? And it's not necessarily coming from the artist, right? I don't think. I think it's something much greater than that. I think there's real magic in creating something that people can come to and share and take what they can from it.
Absolutely. Like I when I went to how do we cannot put our finger on that I think art and artists are searching for, and it's never going to be universal. Not one piece can be universal for each person, but it's all this vibrating coils of the universe lining up right sometimes making it happen. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's it. Exactly.
And so I want to make sure that we have time to talk about High Low Co, because I was so happy when you came up and you gave me a sticker for that, because like I said, I'd known a little bit of your story and I followed on social media, and it just felt like such a hopeful act from someone who I know who had really done the hell and back route. And so I loved it. I was just like, this is exactly the kind of thing I want to see in the world. And so please talk about it. I don't talk about my experience of you starting a gift shop, but I just love it. I love that it exists. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, I also want to just take a moment to say, when I talk about illness, I talk about the isolation and the work and healing and all of that, but I cannot begin to express how amazed I am, the gratitude that I have for the people that caught me in the time I fell from everything. And that was family, that was friends, that was printmakers I know, printmakers I don't know, and just people in my community that just really acts of kindness and generosity saved my life. And all of these things came together, and part of that was also my press acquisition. I had been looking for my own press for a long time, and I'm very particular. I had things that I really wanted and was looking for in a press. I wanted all solid steel, no tubular rollers, because I like to use a ton of pressure on my etchings. And I was, through the grapevine, put in touch with the man who had the press that I ended up buying. And a friend of mine got me in touch with a patron of the arts who wanted to help me with that acquisition. So that whole thing came together through community. And printmakers always have the same thing. Your press finds you, right? It's like a stray cat. It's really a stray animal. Like, you get adopted by your press. But that's really what happened with me. And I always kind of had a belief in that. Like, if I just wait, if I just keep looking and like know that I'm looking, eventually I'm going to find the perfect press. And I did. And then somebody helped me buy it and move it here. And yeah, I kind of knew from the beginning, like High Low Co. I wanted that to be in the name. And I'm still in the process of getting my studio up and running in earnest. I've done a lot of printing on my press and have ideas for how I want to develop my studio practice to be more like a self-contained, self-sufficient business outside of just my creative practice. I want to make it a bit more business official and like have High Low Co. and have regular print releases and continue like my tiered pricing system for work and to have all these things that I want to accomplish business-wise. And I'm thrilled for that that and the potential for that. And I love having a physical space that I can open up and invite people to. Love merch. I love print merch. So I'm so proud of it. When I went to see this press, I took a road trip to Indiana and went through Nashville and got to see, of course, Hat Show Print. And I talked to the printers there and commissioned a letterpress poster for the establishment of my press, which then, for all these reasons, I had to put on hold and kind of delay the debut for a while. But I want to do like a poster, a commemorative poster with them, maybe every 5 years. Or
Awesome.
So let them go. But yeah, that's that about the press.
That's super exciting. We don't have too much time left, but we've done pandemic, we've done your illness, and then there's of course the war in Ukraine, which, talking about the shitty timeline that we're on, that seemed to happen. You know, I would imagine, particularly from your point of view, on the heels of not only us being able to gather together safely, and you particularly being able to gather people safely. So, and then we get the news about the invasion, and I guess I don't necessarily even have a question, but more of like I've been thinking about you and your family, and is there anything particularly you want to say about it, or how it's been affecting you as a creative person or a personal person, or just kind of like give you some space to talk about it if you want to.
My heart really goes out to everybody that is involved, and war is horrible. And I have family in both places. I have family in Ukraine, I have family in Moscow. And of course I love them all dearly. And people are the foot soldiers fighting war, of course. It affects people terribly. And that being said, I can't equate what Russian people are going through with what Ukrainian people are going through, because houses are being demolished, schools are being demolished, people's communities are being destroyed. There's a refugee crisis. And I also don't just want to say war is terrible, but it's hard for me just to speak about this in absolutes, because like I say, I have family in both places, as many Russians do, as many Ukrainians do. And so the conflict is very complex. And I think across the board, nationalism is so dangerous. And we see that here in the United States as well. And I think also the United States has a vested interest to oppose Russia with everything they can. And ideas, great ideas of capitalism versus communism. And there's just such a complex history in the region and a complex history with our nations. So I wasn't prepared to make this statement, and I know I don't know if I'm comfortable with what I said, but it's on my mind constantly.
Yeah.
And as somebody who draws so much inspiration from the arts of the region, and of course considering my family, I hope it's over quickly. I hope it can end soon, and I hope that rebuilding efforts can begin soon. I hope people come home. I hope people can connect to their families and their communities and can heal from the loss of their loved ones.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't want this episode to be at all like, let's talk about all the hard things that have happened to Annalise.
So you're
also didn't seem appropriate not to acknowledge it, not just because of your personal familial connection, but it's in your art and the idea of displacement from the Ukraine is part and parcel to the images that you create. And so it just seems
crochet
it would be good to not ask about it, not to at least give you some space to reflect if you want to. Yeah,
and I appreciate that, because yes, that occurred to me, and I thought, should I prepare something to say? Should I not? I of course don't want to be like a spokesperson or somebody who comes across as somebody who feels like they know what they're talking about.
Like, as a geopolitical PhD, like, here's my hot take.
Yeah, exactly. But it is so present in my work, and these ideas of home and displacement and belonging, these are things my work is about, right? And losing connection, losing family, rebuilding that. I mean, that has a huge influence on me and my practice, and just the way that I live my life. Like, I try not to take any of these things for granted.
Keep going around like this until you have
it breaks my heart that the lands of my heritage, my ancestral homeland, is still just war-torn, and there's so much heartbreak and so much displacement and so much destruction.
Yeah, and I appreciate some of what you were touching on as we were talking about, in the sense that I think people do get so reductive, and they're like, well, you can't get Russia back, like that's, and yet of course when we say these things, like we're talking like what is a country about the people who live within it, who are not making the decisions about where the troops go, and that it's possible to step back and just say, this is a terrible thing that's happening, that we can all hope is over soon, and that it maybe, particularly for people who have little to probably no control over the outcome, like you and I, maybe doesn't need to be more complex than that if it's not, you know? But it can just be like, this is awful, and every single minute of every day I wish it wasn't happening.
Yeah. I mean, I could have, I feel, a much longer conversation on this, and actually get into histories that are very complex, and that's a topic for like a whole other podcast. But there's generations of war and generations of trauma that are so complex, and of course will be preyed upon and used and politicized and used in propaganda.
shut it down. Like, I'm not saying I'm like some cold hard bitch. I can turn it off. Like, I can be like, I can keep it together. Well, right, I've never got married before, but in general, but I don't want to. I want to feel the things. But how do you feel the things without like crying your makeup off? And I think we'll get some great photos.
The one and only Botox Cosmetics, FDA approved for over 20 years. Book a consultation at BotoxCosmetic.com.
But once you have as many as you like, you're going to make sure that top middle stitch in, chain one, and then single crochet into that middle chain of
yeah, because I'm gonna lose my shit. So
loop.
we were at this thing at South by Southwest, and Kara Swisher, who is incredible, like journalist and a podcaster, she hosts a podcast with Scott Galloway. She was like hosting this little thing, and she's so small, and she came out and set up a little step stool, and I was like, that would be great. I went, totally.
Single crochet into that
She's like, I your stool out.
third chain of the
I'm not
next
kidding. I need a stool. You're gonna stand on a stool. I look ridiculous in the photos if I'm not. And I want like, okay, let's get me a stool, but let's put like some draping on top of the stool, so it doesn't look like a stool. Like I want like some white draping on top of it. Okay, we'll talk about that. And we were talking about what my outfits were gonna be. Like I'm gonna marry you in one outfit, and like go to a party in another outfit. Like I have so much to think about, you guys, for this wedding. Well, so I'm going over there ready for this. I'm going over to the venue, meeting with my wedding planner, who her name's Jacqueline. I'm obsessed with her. The Wedding Plan and Company is her company. I mentioned them before. You guys can check them out. But this is gonna feel real. I'm feeling a real bride today. Like going to the venue like with the planner, just me and her making decisions. Every time you tell me a decision you made that you didn't include me, and I'm like, you did that without me? You were telling me about like you and other Ashley like working on some photography stuff, and I was like, I'm not we can't all it's so weird. It's like
And then once you get that round of single crochet, chain one, single crochet, you're just going to go around the top again with just one round of single crochets all the way around.
You can sign up if you're looking at show notes to the Instagram. But hurry, because the drawing will be at 10 a.m. the 19th of November Pacific time. For those of you who don't know origami, we'll be making incredible washi paper and Yoshinogawa Village together for 8 generations. They also have residencies, a paper museum, and so much more. You can hear all about it in episode 13 of this podcast. So go to the PCL Instagram to enter, or just click the link in the show notes. But that is not all. No. Awagami is offering listeners of Pine Copper Live 20% off their entire purchase from the online store between now and the 15th of December. No need to enter anything, no need to wait for a drawing. As of right now, with the offer code PCL20 and %, you can get 20% off your entire purchase. Just enter PCL20 and %, at the PayPal checkout between now and the 15th of December. My guest this week is Emily's Fitch. She is a printmaker based in Austin, Texas, who creates absolutely stunning monumental murals. Her figures represent explorations of home, loss, and family history. Annalise is also a world-class print community organizer and a board member for Print Austin. For those of you who don't know Print Austin, this event is quintessentially what I mean when I say try the party. Since 2014, Print Austin has been hosting a citywide, month-long event to celebrate print. They partner with local galleries and arts venues for exhibitions, demonstrations, and artist talks throughout the event. But from January 31st through February 2nd, that's when some real magic happens. They have a Printmakers Bowl and Print Expo with artists and galleries from around the U.S. showing their goods. Can't make it to Print Austin but still want to join the party? Do not despair. There's a free exchange for this event, and the deadline to apply is right around the corner. The call is open internationally, and the final exhibition will be exhibited at the Print Expo. And right now, Pine Copper Live listeners can enjoy $5 off the entry fee with code PCL and number 5 off. That's $5 off the entry fee for Print Austin Print Exchange between now and December 15th with the offer code PCL5OFF. I will put a link in the show notes to all of this, of course, so printmakers, shake your pretty little tail feather.
was both something I had been doing for a long time, and then all of a sudden kind of had this light bulb moment, which was like, oh, why didn't I realize that sooner?
Yeah.
And I mean, I love textiles and embroidery and the stylistic patterning and just the visual language and these geometric and floral textile patterns. I mean, when you really start studying them and looking at them, they are the same across cultures, which I think is really striking. And so I started putting a lot of that into my work, and people kind of depending on where they're coming from or their influences or references can look at my figures and place them in completely different places, which I think are 100% valid. People will look at them and see Inuit figures or, Japanese stylized. Tolstoy Foundation and came to the United States, and throughout that time that they were moving around, we just have bits and pieces of stories, and so I also have this fascination with oral stories and the histories that we have that are carried by our ancestors that we learn, and through those we learn about ourselves and we learn about them. But if you don't have those, then what do you do? It's kind of just this question mark. And that is very interesting to me. And we do have bits and pieces. One of the characters in this series. Forward, we're going forward from there, and there's not much information going backwards.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to me the way, generally speaking, non-Indigenous Americans, we really tend to lean into the stories that we know from the culture of the background we know. Like, so for instance, I describe myself as Swedish and Norwegian.
And we work in, it's that, again, community and family and belonging is what my work is all about, and so I want to develop that to the best of my ability.
Yeah, exactly. And so my next question is one that I'm kind of curious about asking guests moving forward, because it's one that I've been thinking about a lot myself, which is just why are these pieces prints? Do you think? Why are they drawings or paintings or sculptures? Like, why woodcuts for you? Do you think?
Yeah, they are woodcuts. That is kind of an interesting question. I mean, so when I started the series, I knew that I wanted them to be life size or almost life size. And at that time, I wasn't doing a lot of woodcuts. And I wanted to try my hand at it, and I love the patterning in black and white is really stunning. And when I started the series, I saw these black and white images and then developed this process of dyeing the paper and doing this crazy intricate chinkling, which is how they're colored. But it really was from wanting to explore the tradition of the black and white patterning in woodcut, and also using something that would allow me to make them life size. So it was kind of an experiment, but knowing it was an experiment kind of towards the right end goal, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning about it being the process of problem solving to an ideal solution. But yeah, I would say that's the reason.
Do 2 half double crochet rows
to pivot
and 1 row of single
but also
crochet
this kind of
handles.
speaking of
But again, you can make it as
I'd
thick
love for you to speak
or
to
as thin as you
the
like.
print
And
community
you'd like to
in
make sure
Austin
it's
and
nice
this great
and
event that
strong.
happens called Print Austin, which I believe
And
you're
you go
on
all
the
the
board
way
for and
across
organizer for it.
I am.
in a row of half
All of
double
that, because
crochets.
I know that many people are probably interested in it, and those who
And I was asked to be on the board for that as well, and I'm really excited for that programming and to see the space develop. And so that is, what is the website for that? It's Marfa Community Print, I believe. And it just went live. So
Once
please,
you get to
please
that
me
other
more.
side of the
I don't remember.
bag,
Laura is the
slip
founder.
stitch
So,
in, like you're
but
gonna
just a quick Google, you
skip
can find that out. So if you're in the
stitch
area or
over
visiting
from
the
where
area,
the chain
there's
comes out of,
good printmaking in Marfa as well.
slip
Of course,
stitch
great
in
works
there.
there.
Yeah, that's such a great place for it.
Yes, it is.
do
It is.
2
Beautiful.
more
I'll
slip
make sure
stitches
that we find
into that
exactly where it
bag
is.
like we
Put
did
the
on
link
the
in the
other
show notes
side.
with
It's
everything.
like you're chaining 2 up,
And then where's the best place
and
for people
then you
to
do
follow
your
you
next
and
row
see your
over of half double crochets. one row of single crochets.
Like, yeah, if you want to do it, it's going to be
like
hard.
The way
You're
this
working
looks, and
a
I
lot.
think it makes
You're
it
going to
a
have to
little
fill
bit
many
stronger.
buckets throughout the day, and you know, it's worth it.
Yeah.
I think maybe sometimes I wish they had pushed
That's,
me.
that's so
They were
important,
great.
you know, to have that reality check. Because, like, I mean, I never got that until, like, I graduated college and was like, okay, now what? You know,
Sure.
it's like, it's not, I've heard it's being talked about a little bit more in higher education, but when we were in school, it was like, okay, you're in your bubble, and then, okay, now go be an artist.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was really fortunate too to have my mentorship at community college. It was like, oh, you should apply to these shows, and then you're gonna have to frame your work. So why don't we teach you how to do that? And there's a wood shop right here, and that was invaluable, and really, in a way, kind of got me ready for the career that I have now in the museum. There's a lot of different, you know, there's different museum standardization and best practices, of course, you know, those things. But it's tracing it back. It's really interesting.
Slip
to see
stitch
what
it
it's
again.
Yeah, and by the way, you're going to be rejected for 10 shows before you get one.
Oh yeah,
You know,
you
like-
build a tough outer layer for sure. And then you just learn, like, everybody has different opinions. Not everybody vibes with the same thing. It's subjective and it's not personal. Sometimes the piece is just too large, or sometimes it develops and it's like, oh, this just isn't great for this theme. And you know, I think it's really important just to keep putting it out there and to keep just, you know, letting that roll off, because it's gonna be a perfect fit at some point, sometime.
And even when you find your voice, it's like, you know, so much depends on where the world is at, and sometimes it's going to intersect and sometimes it's not, you know, and so kind of rolling with that is kind of interesting too, because I think for me anyway, it's so important to just maintain that, like, sense of inner authenticity and integrity and do what you do regardless.
Yes.
But the world isn't always going to respond to it in the same way.
Yes, that's right. And oftentimes creative people are kind of on the same wavelength. And going back to this idea of, like, the creative mycelium, you get to read this Reba book too, and he talks about this. These ideas come up at the same time, and it's in collective consciousness. And then if we're really paying attention to our voice and